Yo, what's good YouTube? It's your host HD Samurai here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to bring y'all a new what if, this being the what if movie to what if Subaru was Goku Black's reincarnation. Hopefully you guys do enjoy yourselves, and with that being said, it's your host HD Samurai, and let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different? Man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
To begin the what if, we're not going to start out with Subaru's origins. Now, Subaru growing up will be someone who, by many people's definition, would be blessed. Because you see, Subaru growing up, he'll be gifted with multiple array of abilities that allow his life to be way easier. By that I mean Subaru was born with a photographic memory, a hyperactive intelligence, a stronger than average body. I mean shoot, growing up Subaru never once got sick. And every single time he took a physical, he always ended up coming out with the exact same exams. It seems as if Subaru was the pinnacle of just perfection, which some people actually describe him as. And you see, Subaru, he actually believed them. Growing up throughout his entire life, Subaru had always been told by his parents that he was destined for greatness, that he was their perfect creation. And of course they said this in a loving manner. Subaru took it an entirely different level. As after growing up for so long and after hearing a lot of people compliment him, telling him how amazing he is, Subaru ends up shaping that into his personality. As all around, people end up seeing Subaru as this amazing boy who could do anything. A boy who is just blessed and someone who is going to accomplish many great things in the future. As this will end up enabling Subaru all the way by the time of high school to be quite popular. As he'll be so popular, he'll be so popular to the point where he had a fan club, and not only that, but a bunch of guys wanted to be his friends, and he was just loved by all. As Subaru was just that guy, a guy who was charming, caring, a guy who seemed to be the next person who was going to rule this world pretty much. Overall, just many people hyped up Subaru, as Subaru continued making it look like he was exactly what they anticipated. But you see, that was only on the surface though. Cause currently right now, in Subaru's mind, this will be a whole different story. As instead of being the nice, charming, and humble boy that you see on the surface, deep down Subaru will be the pinnacle of narcissistic. And I mean extremely narcissistic. As every single time, he would just walk around acting all nice and charming, but on the inside, he'll be mocking and berating everyone in front of him. As in his own terms, it will be pretty simple. Everyone that's imperfect will want to flock to the one thing that is in this world, this being him. As in Subaru's mind, he's already built up this foundation to think that he was a perfect being, someone who was meant to rule over everyone, and someone that everyone was supposed to listen to. As he ends up growing up and going throughout life pretty easily in the very beginning. As by the time that Subaru finally finished up high school, he was already heading off to a nice good college to where he was actually going to end up studying to become a judge. As after all, he was going to be the one to decide the fates of others. And overall, Subaru's parents will be very proud of him. Everyone that was his so-called friends and allies, they'll all be giving him support. Although deep down, Subaru, every single time he heard all this and listened to them, he felt nothing more but disgust. As even though he knew that this was nothing more but their true nature supposedly, he still found it disgusting how they like to leech onto others' success when they couldn't even accomplish it themselves. But this is when we now turn our attention to the very day that Subaru Natsuki's life will be flipped upside down. Cause you see, as Subaru was currently walking back home, catching up on some of his course's work, this is when he then stops as he feels this undeniable amount of exhaustion just falls upon him. As he feels himself being weirded out about this, since he always made sure to keep track of his body to make sure he didn't get too exhausted, this is when suddenly, as Subaru ends up closing his eyes 3 times, by the 3rd time he ends up opening them, he is transferred into the world of ReZero. Subaru ends up looking around, confused about what just happened, but thanks to his hyperactive intelligence, he's already able to sum up the conclusion, that he was transferred into another world. And you see, Subaru, after finding this out, on the outside he was trying to remain as calm as possible, but on the inside, Subaru will be cackling, as after all, this was just something that was obviously destined for him. I mean, it made perfect sense. After all, how can someone as benevolent as him be thrown into a world full of mediocreness? He didn't belong in that world, and here was the actual proof. As now that Subaru was thrown in isekai to this world, he decided to actually find out as much information as possible. as during the time when Subaru was actually traveling around, he actually ends up doing a couple of things. Number one being the fact that he actually saves a girl from being run over by a trailer, considering the fact that he was right in front of her, so he decided to jump in and act all heroic. As everyone applauded him, Subaru would just be, drinking in all the praise and enjoying it all, as after all, he truly deserved it. As after making sure the girl was saved and acting all nice, Subaru would continue collecting more and more information, with people being much more nice to Subaru after seeing his, heroic act. But as Subaru was doing this, he eventually decides to stop by at an alleyway, as he was just taking in all the information he had gathered, and not only that, but just how fascinating this world truly was. As he ends up cackling, already excited for what future plans he has, this is when he would then be run up on by a couple of thugs. These being the thugs that approached Subaru in the main timeline. As just when they were asking Subaru to cough up everything he has, Subaru looking at them would tell them that they're making a wrong choice, trying to act as nice and kind as possible, although deep down Subaru was just itching for one of them to even approach him with any bit of hostility, and at that moment he would take advantage of it, as it simply made no sense. How do these beings, these creatures, actually dare approach him, someone who is obviously far above them? As with those thoughts running through Subaru's head, this is when one of the thugs then approached Subaru in what Subaru deemed as a hostile manner. And seeing this, Subaru internally just licked his lips, as this is when he begins to deliver the thug the most brutalest beatdown in his entire life. And not only that one, but the other two as well, considering them as just casualties in the matter. As Subaru beats down on all three of them in such a brutal and gruesome fashion, to the point where literally these guys are literally beaten to near death. As we now flash forward to when Subaru is done, and mind you, by the time Subaru is done, these guys do not even look recognizable anymore. They're still alive, luckily, but they're literally beaten to near death, every last one of them. As Subaru will be currently trying to clean himself up from the disgusting remains that these guys had left upon him, this is when suddenly running through the alleyway will be none other than Felt. As she was currently trying to escape from someone, this is when she then stops as she takes in the gruesome sight, as she and Subaru will actually end up meeting eyes for a second. And this is when Subaru actually ends up putting up his facade once again, as he begins to act like the victim in the entire scenario, which technically he was, but at the same time, he overused a ginormous amount of force. As we see Subaru begin to act all nervous, saying that it was self-defense, but seeming like he took it way too far, as after that he begins to actually ask her to call someone for help. Now Felt, every single one of her instincts were just telling her that something was off about this guy, that he was dangerous. Yet the way that Subaru was acting and the way he was moving around, honestly she felt pity for the guy. But still nonetheless, she had a job to carry out, so she ends up telling Subaru that, she's sorry but she can't help him, as she sends him a pity look and leaves the area. Now you see, when Felt did that, Subaru will actually end up looking at her with a very stoic and cold facade, just as she ends up leaving the alleyway and jumping onto the roof. Because you see, Subaru was okay with many things, alright? He was okay with the way people saw him, admired him, even though he found it disgusting. But the one thing he will never allow is for someone to look at him with pity, alright? That's what he looks at them with, not the other way around. As he ends up glaring at the area where Felt had left, this is when he ends up calming down, returning back to his very, all calm, the nice guy facade, as this is when suddenly running through the alleyway will be none other than Emilia. Now we end up having a brief discussion with Emilia as she begins to accuse Subaru of stealing her insignia. Now Subaru feels disgust at first, but this is when he actually realized that she herself isn't exactly normal, as he could already tell from the way she's already giving off some weird energy, as well as the fact that he also gets introduced to Puck, and not only that, but the fact that she was an elf. He could already tell that she herself was not exactly the same as these mediocre swines, and this made Subaru deeply interested. No, not enough to the point where you can start saying that he was in love with her or anything like that. No, I'm just saying to the point where he's honestly very interested in the individual that she was. As after talking with Subaru and after finding out that he doesn't have the insignia, this is when she ends up trying to leave, only with Subaru actually telling her that he wants to help, acting as if he's a very good and friendly gentleman. And although Emilia tries to see if he was lying, unfortunately even she herself can't tell, so with no other choice she decides to, allow Subaru help. But you see, during this moment we actually end up seeing something very interesting, as when Emilia was trying to find out if Subaru was lying, we also end up finding out that Puck was doing the exact same thing. Now though he could tell that Subaru wasn't lying, he could already tell that Subaru had hidden intentions. Whether they be good or bad, he doesn't know, but the thing is, Puck feels honestly quite weary of Subaru. and this weariness actually caused him to be less all, chillax and carefree with Subaru, and more very stoic in a business-like manner, to which Subaru was actually able to catch notice of. So eventually, after talking with Amelia and going around looking for information, eventually they were able to find the loot house, and they were able to get there much earlier. As by the time they end up arriving there, Subaru actually opens the door first, telling Amelia that he's going to go in, so that way he can, make sure that nothing bad happens to her, trying to act like a gentleman. As just when Subaru was trying to open the door, he was actually be let in by none other than Old Man Ram, as he expects them to actually be clients. Now, eventually this allowed them to enter and sit down, as during this point, this is when Fel would then enter. Now when she does, she immediately is able to spot out Amelia, as she tells Ram that was an idiotic idea. As the two of them begin to argue about how everything turned out, this is when Subaru then feels it. An attack was approaching. As Subaru, sensing this attack, ends up moving Amelia and himself out the way, as just as they do, a Dak will end up flying through the air and cutting through the area where they were just in. As this is where we then see Elsa, the bow hunter, enter. As when Elsa enters the bar, she would immediately begin to compliment Subaru on dodging her attack, as after that she'll begin to go on the offensive. Ram tries to step in and tries to stop her, but unfortunately he's unable to keep up with Elsa's power, and soon is eventually able to be taken out the fight, with him even losing an arm in the process. Now Subaru, seeing this, decides to step in, as Amelia tries to help out Ram by healing up his arm. As this is where we then get the fight between Subaru and Elsa. Now this fight will be actually way closer than it did in the main timeline, mostly because of the fact that Subaru is much more stronger and actually does have like a martial arts style that he goes for. But unfortunately, even though Subaru is way stronger than an average human, thanks to Elsa having way more battle experience, she is eventually able to land a few blows on him to the point where he actually collapses down to his knees. As we end up turning our attention back to Subaru, the boy right now will be going through it in his mind, as he couldn't believe that he's actually about to lose. It should be impossible, and there was no way he's going to let that happen. As fueled by his own pride and his own arrogance, as he's not willing to actually lose to Elsa, this is when we then see Subaru then take a pinkish glow. Although it's not noticeable to everyone else, yet they could feel the pressure that was rising as Subaru was actually tapping into it, his ki. As Subaru, as soon as he tapped into this ki, he will feel an unbridled amount of strength and power just flowing through him. But this is where we actually see something very impossible, something that I couldn't even believe, as I'm the one who's currently talking about the what if. Subaru gets even more arrogant and prideful as he begins to completely talk down to Elsa, as he completely demolishes her throughout the rest of the fight. And I mean, he's not even giving her a chance to fight back, to even, react to any of his movements. No, he's completely blitzing her, as now that Subaru had tapped into his true power, even though it's a small bit of it, it was completely over. As Elsa was unable to dodge, to react, to activate any of her abilities, she was unable to do anything. As by the time that Subaru was done, Elsa looked barely recognizable. As Subaru decides to finish off the fight by sending out a small little ki blast that ends up destroying the area where Elsa once was. Subaru would do all this with a gleeful smile on his face, a smirk that just showed all his arrogance and pride, as everyone can do nothing more but stare at him in just shock. As after this, Subaru would then suddenly end up releasing the energy, as he no longer can maintain the energy that he had once got, causing him to feel extremely exhausted. As Subaru would end up collapsing down to the ground for a few seconds, before eventually getting up, as he had replenished enough of his strength to at least stand up. Now, as everyone's relaxing now, thinking that Elsa had been taken care of and now everything's been, over with pretty much, this is when they would then be proven wrong, as suddenly bursting through the rubble that had occurred after the ki blast will be none other than Elsa, except she was heavily damaged. And by that, I mean she literally lost one of her legs, one of her arms, and literally the entire left side of her body was burned off, as she was only able to see through one eye. But yet, even with all this damage, she was still able to keep moving, as she approaches Subaru, who's still trying to recover, and right before anyone can even try to stop her or try to warn Subaru, it'll be already too late, as she ends up summoning out one last dagger that she had hidden, as she uses it to cut open Subaru's stomach. Subaru ends up bleeding out onto the ground as he stares at Elsa in shock, wondering how can someone like her defeat him, as Elsa will begin to laugh and taunt Subaru, only for her to have a ginormous ice shard go directly through her head, supposedly killing her off. As this is when Amelia tries to run in and help Subaru, but unfortunately the wound was too fatal. As Subaru begins to slowly but surely die out, he'll be cursing everything. This was not how something's supposed to go. He was the hero of the story. There was no way this is how it ends for him. It was impossible. As Subaru ends up cursing himself, as he actually begins to tap into more and more of his ki, this is when suddenly he feels it. The unforeseen hand, as he begins to grab onto Subaru's heart, squeezing it, as all he could hear is Estella just whispering into his ear how much she loves him. Now Subaru, feeling the sensation, would begin to scream to tell her to leave him alone, but unfortunately, there was nothing he could do. As this is when Subaru would then return back to the very beginning of that day, as he ends up waking up right when he ends up transferring to the other world. As we now turn to Subaru, as he is right where he started from the very beginning of that day, Subaru would immediately feel himself begin to analyze everything as he understands exactly what happened, and even dubbing the name of this ability Return by Death. However, this is where we actually end up seeing something interesting, as instead of Subaru being all stressed out about his ability, Subaru would be enjoying the sensation, knowing that a being such as him, it seems as if this very world itself does not want him to leave. As in Subaru's eyes, this just made him seem more perfect. As after all, apparently reality can't even exist without its most perfect creation. As with Subaru thinking this in his mind, this is when he then gets serious, as he decides to hunt down Elsa. As after all, he has to pay the bitch back for killing him off, and there was no way he's gonna let that happen again. Now, as Subaru ends up going through his day, as he eventually ends up finding out the loot house where Old Man Ram is eventually let in, as he ends up talking business with the old man, and later on fell as she ends up arriving. This is when the door would then swing open, as this is when Subaru then turns his attention, preparing to fight, only for Emilia to then enter. Now mind you, Emilia has not met Subaru at all, and Subaru was already able to pick up on the details, considering the fact she looked at him quite confused. But right as Emilia would then enter, this is when a dagger would then be sent flying directly towards her, only for Subaru to appear right in front of her and make her dodge out the way. As now seeing that she was safe from harm, this is when Subaru would then turn his attention to Elsa, as he ends up looking at her with an extremely smug and prideful smile, telling her that she's exactly as pathetic as he thought. With Elsa being quite upset with this comment, as she begins to explain to Subaru exactly all the gruesome things she's about to do to him, with Subaru after hearing this just scoff it off, as after all, she stands no chance. This is where a fight between both Subaru and Elsa would then begin, as the two of them face off against each other. Subaru having a much easier time, although unfortunately, even though he has a much easier time, does not mean that he's able to pull off another win like that, as he once again feels himself get into exhaustion. Now Subaru ends up cursing himself for this, but he already knew what was going to happen. As just when Subaru's body was getting more and more desperate, this is when he then feels it, the unbridled power. But you see, this is when, as Subaru was feeling up that unbridled power though, this is where a change of events would then occur. As when Subaru was actually powering up and ready to face off against Elsa, bursting through the roof would be someone who Subaru did not recognize. As in the original timeline, or at least in Subaru in this what if original timeline, no one had came to save them. It was all up to Subaru, as it truly was a heroic moment. But yet suddenly someone stood in the way of Subaru's heroic moment. This being none other than Reinhard, the strongest knight in the entire kingdom. Cause you see, in this timeline, since Subaru was actually able to fight off against Elsa much earlier and leaving Ram and Felt by themselves, Ram had actually told Felt to go look for someone to help out, to which she does so. As after running around for a while, she eventually ends up encountering Reinhard, and she's actually able to convince him to go to the loot house, which is why he ends up here. So pretty much it plays pretty similar to the events like in the main timeline. And after this, a few events actually play out pretty similar to the events of the main timeline as well. As Reinhard, after just appearing, he immediately just puts Subaru in the bench pretty much, pushing him aside as he decides to face off against Elsa. In a very heroic and amazing moment, Reinhard ends up defeating Elsa using his most powerful technique and ends up sending her flying and crashing. Now immediately everyone will begin to cheer for Reinhard, as everyone that was in the loot house thanks him. As after that, Felt also ends up giving back the insignia to Emilia, and pretty much things go all happy and good. But one person could not stand this. There was no way that he was just pushed aside, as if he was someone common, as if he was a normal background character in his own story. There was no way that was actually happening. This would be Subaru, as he was furious. His pride had been damaged, as literally he was about to turn up right now. He was literally about to get his power up and put Elsa in her place, demolishing her, probably in a way better fashion than anything Reinhard can do. But yet this man ruined it for him. As Subaru internally will be cursing out Reinhard's name throughout the heavens, this is when on the outside he would actually be thanking him, trying to act as if he's a good Samaritan, being a gentleman and everything. Although inside, Subaru will be cursing on Reinhard's name, his family name, his entire bloodline, any future bloodline as well. He'll be cursing out the man. As this will go on for quite a while, this is when eventually Elsa tries to do her attack again, and Subaru, seeing this, actually does step up to the plate this time, as he's actually able to send her flying with a simple kick to the stomach, as he still had some energy from the miniature power up that he had gotten. As after Elsa ends up getting sent flying, this is when she ends up telling everyone in the room that she's going to come back for every last one of them and finish them off gruesomely, as after that she makes her escape. Now immediately after Elsa ends up leaving the area, Reinhardt as well as Amelia will thank Subaru for his help, with Subaru acting all nice and kind, telling them that was nothing and that he was just doing something that any good person would do. But deep down, Subaru found nothing much more but disgust and hatred when Reinhardt actually thanked him. As after all, this man dared try to act all nice and everything when he dare stole his heroic moment? No, he definitely won't forget this. As soon after all these events had finally passed, we actually end up having events playing similar to the main timeline, as Subaru actually ends up staying with Amelia, mostly because of the fact that she wants to thank Subaru for his help. And thanks to the fact that Subaru actually mentioned that he has nowhere else to go, she decides to actually help him out. So after this, Subaru ends up moving to, Amelia's estate. And not only that, we actually ends up finding out that her name was Amelia. As in the previous timeline, she actually ends up telling Subaru that her name was Estella. I forgot to mention this, but it wasn't really that important. As moving on, we now turn to when Subaru eventually ends up arriving there. He ends up getting acquainted with Ren and Rom way earlier than in the main timeline, as after that he would then be taken to his room and actually be given time to rest. But when Subaru was sent to his room, instead of immediately going to sleep, Subaru actually tries to train in order to control this new power, as after all he's going to need it for this world. His encounter with Elsa really opened his eyes as he realized that the normal martial arts that he has and everything, although good in the previous world, was not good in this one, as he now actually planned to learn and master his ki. And the thing is, this training would actually be pretty good, as immediately Subaru was actually getting the hang of mastering and learning his ki much quicker, as this will be thanks to the fact that his body was way above average, and thanks to his hyperactive intelligence and photographic memory. As we now turn to the next day, as Subaru ends up waking up to see both Rom and Rem in his room, as they end up telling Subaru to come along as he needs to meet the headmaster of the mansion, this being Roswald. Now Subaru eventually ends up meeting Roswald as they end up getting along with each other quite fine, since Subaru is still putting up the act and Roswald is just simply Roswald. Now eventually after discussion and after a nice breakfast, this is when Roswald would then actually ask Subaru what he wants to do. And Subaru, after hearing this, then decides that he actually wants to be Amelia's knight. But there was a reason for this. Now mind you, Subaru hates working for anyone. He really hates the idea of working for someone who is beneath him. But the thing is, number one, although Subaru does see Amelia as beneath him, he does find her interesting. And another thing is the fact that Subaru isn't technically working for Amelia, instead he's simply using her. Cause with Amelia's help, Subaru not only gets access to multiple different connections, but he also gets the necessary amount of training and actually has an excuse as to why he needs to train. So immediately after understanding all this, Roswald would consider the proposition before he decides to agree, seeing as that was Subaru's wish. But you see, the thing is, similar to the main timeline, this is where we actually end up finding out that Rem and Rom, well more precisely Rem, will be kind of suspicious of Subaru, mostly because of the fact that Subaru still has the smell of Estella, as unfortunately he does have the Witch of Envy sent on him. So as we now move forward to the next couple of days, we see Subaru's life in the mansion, as majority of Subaru's time there will be spent on training, as Subaru will be slowly but gradually getting stronger and stronger each day that passes. Not only that, but he has made some communication with Amelia, and the thing is, their communication, they end up going quite opposite to what that of Amelia and Subaru were in the main timeline. Cause you see, in this timeline, instead of Subaru pretty much acting like a simp for Amelia, it'll be kind of the reversal, mostly because of the fact that Subaru's acting like the perfect gentleman to Amelia, and not only that, but he was not showing any signs of being suspicious or distrusting or even caring about her appearance. This made Amelia extremely much more affectionate towards Subaru and being much more open-minded for a conversation, to the point where she's pretty much quite simpy-like. And Puck had took notice of this and he instantly was worried for his daughter, as he just felt something was off about Subaru. Not only was he getting stronger at a much higher rate, but he could just feel it, the hidden intentions. Although he doesn't know whether they be malice or not, unfortunately he can't really say anything on the matter because of the fact that Subaru has not done anything to justify this. So for the meantime, Puck has stayed silent. And you see, the people who have been observing Subaru the most have been none other than Ram and Rom, as they both had their own different but similar reasons as to why they kept their attention onto Subaru. As eventually, after the final days of the week would go by, as Subaru had finally gotten stronger, this is when Subaru was just simply walking out in the middle of the night, as he was just looking to get a little bit more training in outside. But as he was walking, this is when Subaru would then have to dodge out of the way, as he would then end up seeing a spike ball and chain actually try to slam into his face. As Subaru ends up looking up, this is when suddenly walking through the darkness will be none other than Rem. As by this point, Rem is 100% convinced that Subaru is part of the witch's cultist. Now Subaru, after seeing Rem there and seeing that she actually dared try to attack him, he would immediately begin to smirk. Cause you see, they were not the only one analyzing Subaru, as Subaru in return was actually analyzing them. But not only them, but everyone in the house. Besides Roswell, because of the fact that he was away most of the time, Subaru kept an eye on Rem and Rom, and not only them, but also Amelia, Puck, and even Beatrice when he met her. Which, a little bit of a fun fact here, but when Subaru ends up meeting Beatrice, their encounter goes quite unusual, as Beatrice, although she still ends up taking energy away from Subaru to find out if he was trustworthy or not, she felt a ginormous amount of fear that was welling up inside of her. Although she didn't show it in front of Subaru, mostly because of the fact that she was pretty stoic and didn't show her emotions, both her as well as Subaru could tell that she was afraid, as Subaru was able to sense it in the way her speech pattern was going, as well as the fact that she would have little twitches here and there every single time she approached him. He was able to tell that she was afraid of him. And Beatrice, she herself already knew as well. But yeah, I just want to let you guys know that little fun fact. But back to Subaru though, he had analyzed every last one of them, mostly so he can get a feel to this world, and once again he realized that every last one of them were unique, alright? They weren't just some dull-of-the-mill NPCs in the background that were meant to gaze upon his perfection. No, he found out exactly what these guys were. These were none other than tools for him. And you see, the thing is, apparently right now Rem was being a kind of disrespectful and disobedient tool, so he has to fix her and make sure that she actually understands something. As this is where we then have the fight between both Rem as well as Subaru. As when the fight begins, with Rem swinging her weapon at Subaru, she begins to question Subaru if he was part of the witch's cult, to which Subaru, continuously putting up his act of being innocent and, not at all threatening, he begins to explain to her that he wasn't. With Rem, after hearing this, feeling even more pissed off as she continues trying to attack Subaru over and over again. And although in the beginning Subaru felt quite amused by her attempts on trying to kill him, eventually he would get annoyed as he decides to finish it off, as he begins to completely beat down on Rem. As he taps it into more and more of his ki, making his body even stronger, he begins to pretty much explain to Rem exactly what's going on here, pretty much stating that he's simply working here and just keeping up his very calm facade. But as he does, his punches will give off a different meaning, as every single punch that Subaru will land, every single time he ends up screaming in his mind that she's supposed to listen to him and wait until he actually has a purpose for her. Since right now he still is trying to find out the purpose for every last one of his so-called tools. As Subaru, after defeating Rem and putting her into unconsciousness, he decides to leave the area as he opens the door to his room, only to stop, as when the door was open, it would reveal none other than Beatrice. As for some weird reason, Subaru was able to actually open up her doors. And when Beatrice actually ends up seeing Subaru, she actually feels herself reel back from fear, but as she ends up turning her attention, she sees Rem on the ground, currently unconscious and beaten up quite badly. She's able to connect the dots immediately as she turns to Subaru as she releases all her pressure. And seeing this pressure, Subaru is already able to tell what's going to happen next as he tries to build up on more ki, but unfortunately he already used quite a bit of it on Rem and his muscles were still relaxing from everything he had done. So unfortunately, Subaru ended up getting killed off by Beatrice as she completely obliterates Subaru's body, leaving nothing left. As Subaru will be once again taken into the dark void as he feels the hands of Estella as she reaches for him, telling him how much she loves him and everything. Subaru, and in some way, somehow, he's actually able to put up a resistance to it. As you see, thanks to the fact that Subaru has been tapping into more of his ki and more of his potential, he slowly but surely is getting more and more control and actually reverting back to how he previously was, that being Goku Black's original power. And thanks to this, Subaru's soul is actually able to resist Estella's abilities to a certain degree, but unfortunately he's not able to fully resist it just yet, as he ends up getting taken away by Estella and as soon as once again brought back as he ends up seeing both Rom and Rem in his room. As this is where we now do a time skip. Now in this run, Subaru will be doing things a little bit differently, as he once again actually asked to become a knight for Amelia, but this time Subaru also asked to also be a butler as well. To which Roswell would accept, with the only difference here being the fact that Rem is a little bit more suspicious of Subaru, especially since the witch's scent was way stronger. As just like the previous run, Subaru will be doing his daily training, but at the same time he will also be helping around the entire manor, getting to know both Rom and Ram, and also getting to know Beatrice as well, as he actually ends up stopping by her library and actually talking to her. Now, although Beatrice is afraid of Subaru, she still ends up acting the exact same way as she does in canon, except Subaru is able to tell that she's being a little bit more respectful towards him, as she was actually doing it self-consciously, or I'm sorry, unconsciously I mean. To which Subaru, after seeing this, will actually smirk, as finally everything was falling in line to exactly what he had planned. Cause you see, Subaru, although he hated to admit it, he actually made a mistake in the previous timeline. Cause see, he had overlooked the idea of actually communicating with his tools, as he realized that these tools actually had the disgusting thing known as emotions. So thanks to this, he actually has to cover the bases of those emotions. So thanks to that, Subaru's playing this weird game where he's pretty much manipulating everyone to see him how people are supposed to see him as. This perfect, nice gentleman, always willing to lend a hand, and pretty much just someone who everyone just trusts and respect. All while Subaru was just simply being the two-faced that he was, keeping his true personality deep within his chest. As we continue on with the story, as eventually it will be finally time for Subaru and Rem to actually go out for groceries. Now by this point, Rem is still suspicious of Subaru, but after going on this grocery trip and after eventually getting them, she actually sees Subaru acting all nice and kind to the children. This actually ends up making Rem less suspicious of Subaru, as once Subaru was actually playing with the children, this is when a girl would then approach him with a dog. And as soon as the dog tries to approach Subaru, this is when Subaru will actually end up catching it by the neck, preventing it from biting him. As Subaru begins to look at the dog, wondering why it was trying to attack him, this is when Subaru actually, thanks to all the training that he has gotten with Ki from both of the previous loops, Subaru was actually able to tell who exactly, or more precisely what exactly this thing was. All he was able to feel was a ginormous amount of malicious and evil intent. And seeing this, Subaru actually smiles as he begins to release his own pressure. Thanks to all the training, Subaru was actually able to focus it into one area, as he focuses all his pressure onto the dog. This will make the dog, also known as a mob beast, to actually feel true fear, as it actually begins to shake in the presence of Subaru. And seeing this, Subaru ends up smirking as he gives the dog back to the girl, to which the girl, who being the owner of the mob beast and the one controlling it, would be extremely confused since she'd never seen anything like this. As soon after those events had passed, we see Subaru as well as Rem returning back home, as they actually had a pretty nice conversation. And this conversation actually allowed Rem to open up and actually realize that Subaru wasn't part of the witch's cultist. Although she did have her suspicions, unfortunately Subaru has already proven himself to not be part of the witch's cult, so that means that Rem is going to trust him, for now at least. As after this moment, we can now proceed to nighttime. As Subaru during this time would actually be sitting down, as he was currently getting ready to hunt down the mob beast from earlier. Because you see, Subaru was able to connect the dots immediately, thanks to him being way smarter and obviously having way more intelligence and adaptability. Subaru was able to tell immediately what they're planning. Although not exactly, like he doesn't know exactly what they're planning to do, he does know it's up to no good. So thanks to that, Subaru's already preparing for the fight, as well as the fact that he's not going to tell anyone about it, mostly because of the fact that this will give him the perfect opportunity. The opportunity to test out how strong he had gotten. As we now soon turn our attention to when Subaru ends up rushing towards the village, making sure to sneak away while no one else is actually aware that he left. As when he arrives at the village, he ends up seeing everyone there worried, as a lot of their children actually went missing. As soon as they see Subaru, they begin to explain this to him, with Subaru already putting up his facade, acting all nice and kind, telling him that he's going to end up getting them all back. To which they all thank Subaru for his help, as after that, Subaru then rushes into the forest. And I'm only going to explain this with brief detail, but the main point of it is the fact that Subaru proceeds to slaughter every last one of these mob beasts. It isn't a fight, it's a full-on massacre. Thanks to their training with the key, as well as the fact that Subaru had gotten stronger than he was previously, Subaru was strong enough to the point to defeat every last one of them by himself. As not only that, but Subaru was getting more and more powerful each time he fought them. So eventually, Subaru ends up finally facing off against the very last one of them. And when Subaru does, instead of actually sending out like a key blast or just punching it, Subaru does something interesting. As for some odd reason, on pure instinct alone, his body actually begins to compress Ki into the palm of his hands, as he begins to actually form and release a black Kamehameha wave. As this attack was so powerful, even though Subaru had never used it before in his life, and not only that, but Subaru's control over it wasn't perfect either, as by the time the blast had already hit the mob beast, it was already disforming and actually causing way more destruction all around. But still nonetheless, this attack was so powerful that it was able to one-shot the mob beast and leave nothing of it behind, as well as cause generous amount of damage to the surrounding area. As Subaru ends up looking at his newfound power and pure happiness, unfortunately he had used up quite a large amount of energy, too much to the point where his body almost collapses. But still, he had a mission to complete, as well as the fact that he has praise to deserve. As after that, Subaru ends up saving the rest of the children and returning back to the village. And by this point, surprisingly, Rem, Rom, as well as Emilia had arrived at the area. Cause you see, Emilia in the middle of the night actually decided to check on Subaru. Cause you see, like I said, the roles are actually opposite in this one. With Emilia being kind of, falling for Subaru rather than Subaru falling for her, as this was mostly thanks to Subaru's fake facade. But back to the explanation, as Emilia was actually trying to check on Subaru in the middle of the night, but she eventually is able to tell that Subaru was no longer there. And after that, she decides to go to the village to find where Subaru is or ask anyone if he was there, to which Ram and Rem accompanied her. And soon after that, they were able to get to the village, find out exactly what happened, and that'll be exactly the time where Subaru ended up returning back. So soon after this, and after getting everything situated, eventually Subaru ends up returning back, getting a nice bit of rest. Emilia ends up once again reinforcing the magic crystals, preventing any more mob beasts from entering, and after that things go by pretty swell. And by the time Subaru ends up waking up the very next day, he will eventually end up getting berated by Emilia, to which although he was extremely annoyed at this, he decided to let it slide since Emilia was actually falling right into the palm of his hands, as she was already showing off this level of concern for someone that she only known for a good week. That was it. And Rem, she herself would actually be very appreciative to Subaru, ignoring all her suspicions of him by this point and completely forgetting about them, considering the fact that she already realized that Subaru was not part of the witches cult. And now, while Rem does not have that same crush on Subaru just yet, she does have quite a level of affection towards him, being much more kinder and more respectful, to which Subaru enjoyed seeing it. As after this, we now once again do a time skip. Throughout this time, Subaru continues on with his training and helping around the entire manor. Roswell ends up eventually returning back and getting informed about all this, and eventually after that, it will be finally time for them to end up going to the royal capital. With the only difference here being the fact that Emilia does actually want Subaru to come along with her, as not only by this point Emilia sees Subaru as a friend, but not only that, but he's also her knight, and she's seen him train, she saw his power, and after defeating all those mobbies, she thought he was more than prepared for it. And not only that, but this Subaru actually knows how to control his emotions, unlike the one in canon, and Emilia is actually able to take notice of this, so that's why she's even more confident to bring Subaru along. As after this, we now turn to when both Subaru, Emilia, and Rem end up arriving at the capital, as after that, they end up going to the election. But as they were going there, eventually, Emilia has to do some things on her own, so she tells Subaru to wait while she does so. Subaru does so, of course, being respectful and, continue putting up the facade, as after that, he sees similar thugs to the ones that actually try to rob him in a previous loop, trying to rob another girl. And due to this, in a heroic manner, Subaru ends up stepping in and saving her, as after that, he ends up finding out that she was actually another one of the candidates. And the thing is, in Subaru's eyes, she once again seemed to be someone who was very unique, someone who could be a tool to him. As with that thought in mind, Subaru internally would smirk, as this is when her knight would then arrive, and after a little bit of a discussion between the three of them, they end up leaving. As after that, Subaru ends up encountering Emilia, who after seeing Subaru talk with the other candidate, felt extremely uncertain. As she begins to ask Subaru if she knew him, if he knew her, to which Subaru ends up explaining that he doesn't and just stepped in to save her. And Emilia, after hearing this, actually believes Subaru, mostly because of the fact that she actually has a crush on him and also because of the fact that she actually sees Subaru as a friend. So after this, they decide to just go to the royal candidacy, as they end up encountering Julius, who ends up kissing Emilia on the hand. And although Subaru does not react at all to this because he truly doesn't care, Emilia would actually react to it quite flustered as she looks at Subaru sneakily, mostly because of the fact that she doesn't want Subaru to get the wrong idea. As after that, they end up going to the royal candidacy, as it will be finally time for Emilia to speak up, and unlike in the main timeline where Subaru actually makes a fool of himself in front of everyone and supposedly embarrasses Emilia, Subaru actually stays quiet and listens to her. As right before she actually entered in there, Subaru, being the nice and so-called supporting friend of her, decided to actually give her some pep talk. And this actually ended up reflecting pretty positively on Emilia, as even though many people had their own bias towards her, she simply stood there and took it. As now that Emilia had finally finished up and now that the royal candidacy was not interrupted, that means things can proceed quite smoothly. Except there was one big difference here, and it was the fact that when Reinhardt made his appearance known, Subaru's blood boiled. As soon as he saw the man, all he wanted to do nothing more was to fight him, to put him in his place, as he still remembers what happened. But he decided to save it, keep it deep hidden, so that way when it was finally time for him to actually pay him back for what he did, he can do so deservingly. And also make sure that it's properly served. As after the royal candidacy was done, we see Subaru actually preparing to leave, only to be stopped by Julius. Because you see, earlier when Subaru was actually, going inside the royal candidacy along with Amelia, Julius had actually asked Amelia who Subaru was, to which she simply announced that he was her knight. And this actually made Julius quite upset about this, as although Subaru has shown to be quite respectful and actually showing the dignity of being a knight, he isn't really convinced that Subaru has the training as well as the proper skills to be called a knight. So thanks to that, Julius ends up challenging Subaru. And I'm gonna have to skim through this fight, mostly because of the fact that Subaru in this fight just simply dominates Julius. It isn't even funny. As thanks to Subaru or having so much control over his ki to this point and having way more, fighting styles, as well as the fact that he actually is now at the point where he's actually developing moves with his ki, all that is just way too much for Julius. As by the time Subaru is done, Julius is literally beaten up and bloodied and bruised in front of all the knights, and this actually ends up getting the attention of Amelia, who ends up approaching Subaru after the incident. And although Subaru is kind of her crush and everything, and also her friend, unfortunately she does have to punish Subaru for this, since in her own ways of viewing it, Subaru had embarrassed her. So thanks to this, she scolds Subaru for a little bit and tells him that he has to stay here. And Subaru understands this, as he just completely takes his punishment in great stride, although deep down internally, Subaru actually was using this as an opportunity to go for our next part of his plan, as Subaru had made a few adjustments to it. Because you see, during the royal candidacy, Subaru had actually seen every last one of the candidates that were there, as he saw that every last one of them were unique in their own way. Every last one of them had a purpose, a use, and every last one of them was a simple tool for him to use at any moment, as Subaru made plans for every last one of the candidates. As we now do a little bit of a time skip, as we turn to the end of Subaru's punishment, as it was finally time for him to leave the capital. Because you see, during the time of the capital, Subaru has spent his time training, as well as trying to get more and more information about every last one of the candidacy, so that way he can actually get some information and actually use it for later. And also during this time period, we actually find out that later on, Rem during this time period actually does develop a crush on Subaru, mostly because of the fact that throughout this entire time, Subaru and Rem have truly bonded, or at least that's what Rem saw in her own eyes. As throughout this time, Subaru has been playing his cards correctly and has been emotionally manipulating Rem completely, as her earlier affection to Subaru would have been multiplied by this point. As we now turn to them leaving the capital, we see things going pretty similar to canon, all the way until eventually they end up encountering this mist. And as they do, eventually after getting into this mist, Subaru feels imminent amount of danger, as he tells Rem to floor it. Rem hearing this would do so to just that, as he ends up telling her to get away as far away from the mist as possible, as this will be none other than the white whale that was approaching. As Subaru ends up cursing its existence, this is when eventually they're not able to outrun the mist for too long, as Rem actually decides to actually hop off and go fight off the white whale, only to be stopped by Subaru, who's able to stop her just in time. And in a very brief instance, we see Subaru act very affectionately towards Rem, telling her that it was okay and that she should live, going back to her sister and everything. Now Rem would actually break down emotionally because of this, as she cries to Subaru, as Subaru was being very emotional and comforting for her. Although that would be his facade on the outside. On the inside though, Subaru was already making plans for it. He was going to annihilate this thing, and soon after this, he was once again going to go back to his regular schedule. He was not going to let this beast stop him. As after this, he ends up sending Rem away, as he needs his tool for later, as after that he faced off against the white whale. And I'm just going to tell you right now, Subaru is actually able to beat it. As even though the white whale is definitely strong and definitely has the ability to take him down after a certain period of time, Subaru is luckily able to defeat it, using not only a generous amount of his ki, to which he has actually gotten quite a large amount of control over, and also large amounts of, but not only that, but he's actually able to finish it off using a black Kamehameha wave, as by this point he's actually able to control it to a certain amount, as he uses the attack to burst through the head of the white whale, killing it off almost instantly. As after that, Subaru ends up looking down at the white whale's body and just laughs in glee as he begins to laugh like a maniac, as after all, it made sense. This was his perfect victory. This was his story, and there was no way he was going to let himself die like that. No way. Never again. As Subaru continues to laugh like a maniac though, this is when he would then stop, as suddenly he would then hear the cries of 2 more white whales. Subaru looks up into the sky to see 2 more approaching him, cause you see these 2 are actually responding to that of the first one being killed off. And Subaru, seeing this, glares angrily at them. No way was he gonna let himself get killed off again. No way. It was impossible. This was his story. There's no way he was perfect. This can't be. As he once again powers up, as he rushes at the 2 white whales, trying to fight them off. But unfortunately, it would not last too long, as during that time, Subaru would be killed off, as he'll be killed off by the mist and eventually forgotten by everyone. And this is where finally Subaru had enough of it. This was finally the thing that broke Subaru, but not in the way that you're expecting. As when Subaru was actually sent to this endless void, as he ends up hearing Satella whispering in his ears, telling him how much she loves him and everything, as well as keeping a firm grip on his heart. This is where we then see something surprising, as Subaru proceeds to completely destroy the unforeseen hand, as well as destroying the rest of them that were wrapping around his body. As Subaru would then make his way to Satella. Now Satella would be there watching Subaru approaching, as she would have tears in her eyes, as she didn't want Subaru to die again, but unfortunately he did. And now she was even more surprised to see that her beloved Subaru was approaching. As this went, to her surprise, the entire environment seemed to change thanks to Subaru's presence. And not only that, but Subaru's aura, it was just dominating, as it felt completely different than how it was before. It felt stronger, more ferocious, more in control. As eventually Subaru ended up arriving in front of Satella, as she would be there crying and apologizing. This is when, to her surprise, Subaru then grabs her and pulls her into a very comforting hug. As Satella, after getting hugged by Subaru, will be very flustered, but actually fully enjoy it, as she then falls deeper into Subaru's embrace, all the while he continues whispering sweet things into her ear. As Satella will be unaware about the fact that Subaru by this point has finally lost it, as he no longer cared about putting up a facade. He no longer cared about how people viewed him. No, he already knew it. It was cemented that he was perfect, and being in this world finally made Subaru realize it. As thanks to that final death, Subaru finally realized what his purpose was, what he needed to be, and something that he obviously was destined for. Cause you see, this world was way more flawed than the other one that he was in. There were so many flaws into this world. At least in the other world, the imperfections at least knew their place, but this world, the imperfections didn't. And the only way to cure imperfections was by showing them true perfection and forcing it onto them. As Subaru had finally made up his mind, as he was going to reshape this corrupted world and refold it in his own image, as he was going to make sure that this world knew its place and not being beneath him. As after this, Subaru continues to talk to Satella, being all nice, kind, and sweet and caring, all the while making sure to let her know about her place, her role, and everything. And Satella, by this point, thanks to her being so in love with Subaru, she just blindly listens to him. As after getting a hug by Subaru, after listening to all those sweet words and Subaru's promises, she's fully, completely under his control by now, as she listens to Subaru's every whim. As we now turn our attention back to Subaru, who is once again brought back to the very beginning of Emilia's so-called punishment. And when he does, this is when Subaru decides to make his move, not caring about anything at all. As this is where we now do a time skip, as events pretty similar to the canon actually end up playing out in this one. As Subaru once again ends up talking to Crush, and after explaining to her about the white whale and also where its whereabouts are, she agrees to actually help out Subaru. Although she does end up warning Subaru that if he's lying, he's gonna actually pay dearly for it, to which Subaru just simply agrees. Another thing that also ends up happening is the fact that Subaru ends up getting not only Julius, but also half of Crush's forces to go to Emilia's manor. The main reason for this one is because of the fact that thanks to Satella completely obeying Subaru and just completely following him at every single whim, she actually ends up giving Subaru access to information. And not only that, but she also has some connections that are willing to give her this information in exchange for something else. So thanks to this, Subaru ends up finding out exactly that something bad is going to happen to Emilia, so he decides to send half of Crush's forces to go take care of it, along with Julius. As after that, we can now do a time skip to the day of the white whale's end. As we see Crush's forces now arriving along with William as well as Subaru, this is when the white whale would then make its appearance known, as immediately seeing the white whale, every last one of them would then attack. And as they do though, William will be the one doing the most damage, as he'll be the one taking down the white whale. All the while, Subaru had decided to stay behind, as he wasn't here for this weakling, no, he was here for the other two. As soon as that first white whale was taken down, this is when suddenly 2 more would then appear. And Subaru, seeing this, immediately stepped up. As just when Crush's forces, as well as Crush herself being slightly winded after taking down the first white whale, this is when Subaru then tells them to stay back since he has his own personal business with them. And this is when Subaru begins to release a pressure. This pressure shaking up the entire battlefield, as everyone turns their attention onto him. As Subaru's hair will then flow wildly through the air as he begins to take in a pinkish glow, something that's not visible to anyone there. As this is when Subaru then taps into it. Super Saiyan Rose. As he will gain this new appearance, this new almighty power that he had attained from training, as it was finally time for him to get revenge. And it was finally time to show everyone exactly where he's placed in this world. As he immediately begins to massacre the 2 white whales, not giving them any chance to fight back, as every single time they try to release the mist in order to, kill him off and erase him, Subaru would be able to blow away the mist like it was nothing, as he completely obliterates the white whale, leaving nothing left of it. Everyone will watch this spectacular beating in shock, as he couldn't believe his power, all while Crush had her newfound respect for Subaru, as well as her own personal interests. As now that the white whale had been taken care of, we can now continue on with this arc. As most of the events that play out are pretty similar now that Julius as well as half of Crush's forces were at Roswald Mansion as well as protecting Amelia, they end up encountering the witch cultists, and they end up killing them off and defeating them. And eventually, arriving much sooner than he did in the main timeline, Subaru ended up arriving at the battlefield as he will still be deeming on his new Super Saiyan Rose. And when he arrives, Subaru ends up annihilating the rest of the witch's cultists that are currently remaining, with the only one left being Betelgeuse. And with Betelgeuse being the last one remaining, Subaru proceeds to annihilate the man multiple times. But the thing is, thanks to his ability, he kept coming back, until eventually Subaru ends up destroying every last one of the unforeseen hands, until Betelgeuse, in a last ditch effort, decides to actually try to transfer over to Subaru's body. But this was his last mistake. Cause you see, when Betelgeuse ends up arriving in front of Subaru's soul, he would immediately end up getting annihilated by it. As thanks to Subaru tapping into his full potential, Subaru by this point was actually so in control and so connected to his potential that enough to the point where his soul was just so powerful that it was actually able to overpower Betelgeuse and completely annihilate his soul, killing him off permanently. As with that being said, the witch's cultists will be taken care of. Subaru had saved Amelia, had put an end to the white whale, and overall, this will put an end to season 1 of ReZero. As this is where we now continue on with the timeline. As this is where we now turn our attention to season 2. And I'm not gonna lie to you, a majority of season 2 is gonna be something entirely different, with only a small bit of things that are pretty similar to the canon. As thanks to Subaru's awakening in the last season, Subaru has already reached a point of enlightenment, as he ends up using all these abilities to master degree, and keeps improving with them the longer he uses them. As one of the examples being the fact that thanks to Subaru being way more powerful, he ends up stopping Rem from being in a coma and Crush from losing all her memories to gluttony. Not only that, but Subaru actually does faces off against Regulus, and to the surprise of Regulus himself, Subaru is actually able to keep up with him and actually beat him. As this not only caused Regulus to retreat, but also caused Subaru to gain even more in favor with Crush, as apparently by now she's completely in debt to Subaru, and not only that, but also she has her own personal interests as well. As when we continue on with the story, we see Subaru make even more example of these changes, as thanks to Subaru being much smarter, as well as having the help of Satella, this allows Subaru to go through the story quite easier, as he doesn't really die at all during these loops, mostly because of the fact that Subaru is completely in control. And this ends up reflecting positively on Subaru, because of the fact that Subaru seems to be able to take care of any threat that comes along to harm the kingdom, and is also able to help out Amelia, and also gets close with every last one of the candidates. This made Subaru be extremely popular in the kingdom, as many people knew of him. Many people had positive opinions of him. But there's even more, as we end up finding out that Subaru throughout the majority of season 2 actually ends up building up a connection with every last one of the candidates, as every last one of them have their own personal opinion on Subaru, as well as their own personal interest in him as well. As Subaru ends up making this ginormous facade and appearance around the entire public, Amelia by this point is completely emotionally relying on Subaru, as she's basically there to hear every single one of his praises and opinions, as by now she just completely is enamored with him. But she's not the only one, as Subaru has quite a handful of people actually doing that for him, as many people actually looked to Subaru as this perfect being who could solve any problem, could do anything, and Subaru would do just that. But you see, there was a problem though, and it was the fact that Subaru, he was only like this in the public eye. He was only that in the surface. Cause you see, Subaru had got his hands dirty. He had taken a much darker path. As remember when I told you that Subaru had already planned out to make sure that this reality was going to be exactly like him, painted in his own image, whether they liked to or not? Subaru had made sure to stick to that promise. Because you see, although on the surface, Subaru was shown as this noble man who was basically able to do anything, whenever it was nightfall or whenever Subaru was by himself, that's when he begins to commit atrocities. As Subaru begins to take down every last one of the witches' cultists in brutal fashion, as he actually ends up getting the moniker known as the Reaper. As the one thing that anyone is actually able to tell of Subaru is the fact that he always likes to finish off his enemies with a pink scythe, as this will be none other than the key scythe that Goku Black uses. But that was not the only thing though, and it is the simple fact that no one actually knows Subaru's true identity. As throughout the entire time Subaru was like literally slaughtering a bunch of people and doing a bunch of bad things, no one knows that it's him. He keeps up the public appearance. He allows people to view him as someone who was perfect, which he truly was. As at the end of the day, this reality is supposed to be what he wants it to be. And he doesn't care who or what got hurt in the process to make sure it was. But you see, someone was catching on to all of this. And this would be none other than Reinhardt. As Reinhardt has actually been trying to keep track of the Reaper and actually trying to locate him in order to stop him from doing what he's doing. Although he's taking down the witches' cultists and doing many other things, the casualties of doing so were just tremendous. As literally let's say this, if there was an entire village, alright? An entire village, alright, that actually hosted at least a small group of the witches' cultists, Subaru would annihilate the entire village in the process of annihilating the witches' cultists, and he wouldn't care about the drawback of it. As in, at the end of the day, he was just doing what was necessary. So thanks to this, Reinhardt was actually trying to put a stop to the so-called Reaper. And finally, after investigating for so long, he was able to connect the details. As we now turn to a very stormy night, as we see Subaru currently deeming his Super Saiyan Rose attire, as he finally just finished off slaughtering the last one of the witches' cultists in a certain village, which by the way, that village will be burning down to the ground after Subaru was done. After seeing this, Subaru will look at it dispassionately as he prepares to walk away, only to be stopped by none other than Reinhardt. As Reinhardt will be staring at Subaru stoically and emotionlessly, Subaru, seeing the man who actually took that heroic moment away from him, would begin to chuckle, asking him what's with that face. Now mind you, Subaru is actually in disguise right now, as he has not shown his face. But that will be kind of pointless to Reinhardt, as he already knew who he was. As he decides to ask Subaru directly why he did all this. And Subaru, seeing that his identity was now pointless, decided to reveal himself, as he was deeming now the Super Saiyan Rose form, as he also was wielding the scythe, as he begins to just clean up the blood off of it, pretty much explaining to Reinhardt, saying that there is some casualties that are required for change. And hearing this, Reinhardt can feel nothing more but disgust for Subaru, as he tells Subaru that he knows what's going to happen next. As unfortunately, Reinhardt is going to have to turn Subaru in. He can't allow this to go on any further. And Subaru, after hearing this, just smirks as he tells Reinhardt that he doesn't stand a chance. As with that, we then see both of them just simply stare at each other before disappearing and clashing in the middle, as Subaru's scythe would connect with Reinhardt's sword, as both of them would end up causing a ginormous shockwave to go across the entire area, as we see the fight between both Reinhardt and Subaru. Now this fight would go on for quite a while, as unfortunately Subaru was not able to land any blows on Reinhardt, as thanks to Reinhardt's divine protection, he would just immediately be able to avoid all of Subaru's attacks. But there was a problem though, and it was the simple fact that none of his attacks were actually doing any damage to Subaru. As thanks to Subaru now being in Super Saiyan Rose and being way more powerful, none of Reinhardt's attacks can really phase him. And if he were to even get the opportunity to attack, Subaru would already appear right in front of him to prevent him from attacking him. As this will go on longer and longer though, we actually see Subaru already having a strategy for Reinhardt's divine protection, and also having a strategy to take on Reinhardt. As Subaru throughout the fight begins to actually berate Reinhardt, calling him lazy and a failure. As you see, Reinhardt was not the only one that was studying information about the Reaper, or aka Subaru, as Subaru had actually been studying Reinhardt himself, analyzing him, finding out every single scope of information about him. As after the events of Season 1, and after getting to know all the candidacy and getting a connection with every last one of them, Subaru had used this to his advantage by scoping out information on Reinhardt, finding out everything about him. And although Reinhardt definitely had some impressive feats, unfortunately, to Subaru's eyes at least, Reinhardt was nothing more but a pale imitation of him. As before Subaru had entered the world, Reinhardt was the closest thing to being perfect, as after all, he seemed to have no faults, having mastery over combat, have a very OP ability, and overall just someone who had so much potential. But unfortunately, it seems as if that potential was actually wasted on Reinhardt, as even though he was literally the strongest knight in the entire kingdom, unfortunately, he couldn't do much, as the Witcher's cultists were still roaming free as long as he was around. And not only that, but he was not able to put a stop to every last one of them, unlike Subaru, who's only been here for a little bit and was already making drastic changes. As Reinhardt would actually listen to Subaru berate him, calling him a failure, and listing off everything he failed at, as he failed at preventing Subaru from slaughtering multiple amount of the Witcher's cultists, preventing him from burning down villages in order to stop them, and overall how Subaru had been doing everything that Reinhardt was supposed to do, as pretty much Subaru had decided to cement the fact that he was above Reinhardt, and Reinhardt was nothing. Now Reinhardt continued to try fighting Subaru. He kept trying his best, even decided to bring out his ultimate technique, as by this point his sword decided to unsheath itself, now truly seeing Subaru as a worthy enemy and a worthy opponent. But unfortunately, even with this sword, and even with him using his full power, unfortunately Reinhardt is not able to keep up with Subaru doing the same thing, as unfortunately he's not able to land a single blow on Reinhardt. But luckily and finally, after fighting off against Reinhardt for so long, eventually Subaru's words were finally getting to him. As you see, after fighting for so long and after seeing how much casualties and damage they were doing by simply fighting with each other, Reinhardt was actually beginning to see and actually think of himself as a failure, as his once strong and unwavering will was now being slowly but surely breaking down by Subaru. And Subaru, seeing this, was very pleased as he decides to finally wrap it all up, as just when he was actually about to throw a black Kamehameha wave, Reinhardt would be there as he tries to stop the attack, thinking that the attack was aimed at him, only to be completely in shock as Subaru would aim the attack downward, as this will cause more damage to the surrounding area. Reinhardt was luckily able to dodge, but unfortunately, the surrounding area would not be so lucky, as thanks to Subaru's attack, the surrounding area was now completely decimated, as there was nothing left behind. It looked like a wasteland, as Reinhardt could do nothing more but collapse down to his knees, unable to believe that all of it was gone. All life in that entire area was now gone, as he couldn't believe it. And Subaru, seeing this, once again begins to talk down to Reinhardt, reminding him of his failures, reminding him how he failed to stop him from causing this, and overall just really showing Reinhardt his place in the world. As after hearing this and after seeing all the destruction that happened, as Subaru begins to detail about all the things that he had done, all the massacre, all the Witcher's cultists' unfortunate death to him, Reinhardt can do nothing more but actually look down as he tells Subaru to just simply stop. As at first he said it with a very firm and wavery tone, but now he just said it completely desperately and hopelessly, as he just tells Subaru to stop, to the point where it actually looks like he's begging him. And Subaru, seeing this, was all the more pleased as he had finally done it. As thanks to Reinhardt's OP ability, Subaru was having a very hard time with trying to injure him. But you see, even though Reinhardt was very powerful when it came to not being hurt, that didn't mean that mentally he was strong enough for all of this. As by now, Reinhardt actually had that Yuji look by the end of Sukuna's whole entire massacre of Shibuya. So yeah, he had that Yuji look right now, and things were not looking good for him. As Reinhardt just tells Subaru to stop, begging him to stop everything, this is when Subaru then walks towards Reinhardt, telling him that he no longer has any intentions of fighting him anymore. As basically he's kicking Reinhardt when he's down, as he begins to explain to Reinhardt that he's such a disappointment that now even Subaru does not even want to face him, or even look at him. And Reinhardt, he can do nothing more but actually shiver up at this, as literally he could feel tears going down his face. And Subaru, seeing this, would realize that the job was now done, as he walks away from Reinhardt, telling him that his existence is no longer needed, and that he was nothing more but a disappointment and flaw of this world. As Reinhardt says nothing as Subaru will leave the area, as he will be staring down at the ground, tears going down his face, as he literally had a broken expression. As after that day, Reinhardt would never make an appearance known ever again. No one knew where the strongest knight of Lagunica had went, but unfortunately it seems as if he had disappeared. Luckily though, a new knight had stepped in, this being none other than Subaru. As thanks to the fact that Reinhardt was now gone, this actually allowed many people to turn to Subaru since he was literally the next best choice. As thanks to Subaru now being the strongest knight of Lagunica, he gained even more respect and admiration, as enemies just even hearing about Subaru actually shiver up in fear. And you see, thanks to Subaru's connections to all the candidacy, Subaru's actually able to find out more information about the Witch's cultists, as he still does what he usually does, hunting down and slaughtering every last one of them, so that way he can end up fulfilling his dreams and ambitions. As these would explain the final moments of ReZero, as we see Subaru basically standing on top of the entire kingdom of Lagunica, standing as the strongest knight, the one with the connections with every last one of the candidacy, the one who has the Witch of Envy, Satella, at his corner, and basically the one who stands above all in this world. as this will be the end to What If Subaru was Goku Black's Reincarnation. Thank you all so much for tuning to this What If. Hopefully you guys do enjoy. And with that being said, it's your host Seishi Samurai, and he's signing off. Peace and have a lovely day.